I, Dr. Seema Singh, SAS Women of Ranchi, welcome you to a fascinating literary session, The Right Circle in Ranchi. Mr. Mihir Vatsa will engage in an engaging chat with Ms. Meena Sinha. I would like to invite both of you on dais, please. Before the evening proceeds further, allow me to say a few lines about Prabha Ketan Foundation. Prabha Ketan Foundation is a Kolkata-based non-profit trust founded by an eminent Indian literature, entrepreneur, philanthropist, social activist, and feminist late Dr. Prabha Ketan, inspired by national philosophy of unity in diversity. The essence of foundation is the soulful amalgamation of the multicultural diversity of India and the creation of boutique initiatives and activities that showcase at priceless literary and cultural asset of India for the past 40 years. The foundation praiseworthy literary and cultural initiatives and enjoy global identity and niche audience. They celebrate the jeweled cultural heritage of India, thereby creating the finest experience, the cultural landmark on the global map in association with Petron Sri Cement Limited, Distinguished Associate and SAS Women of India. The foundation aims to encourage and widen the reach and readership of English literature to literary enthusiasts worldwide. Out of the bouquet of literary initiatives, the Right Circle is a stellar platform that connects authors writing in the English language to their readers in India and abroad. The session regales in engaging conversation about their literary works, journey, and viewpoints. It's indeed a privilege and pleasure for me to welcome Mr. Mihir Vatsa and conversationalist Ms. Meena Sinha to an amazing session that the initiative called The Right Circle. Allow me to introduce the author and conversationalist. Mihir Kumar Jha, better known as Mihir Vatsa, is an Indian poet, writer, and photographer. Vatsa is a winner Satya Academic Yuva Puraskar, the Sri Nivas Raipur Poetry Prize, a Toronto Funds the Arts Award in Writing. Scholar by training, he is a presently doctoral fellow at the Indian Institute of Technology, Delhi. He is author the critically acclaimed travel memoir Tales of Hazaribagh and intimate exploration of Chotanagpur Plateau. Conversationalist Ms. Meena Sinha has done MA, MPhil and NET in English literature. She has been a freelancer, writer and translator, contributing feature, review and profile in newspaper and magazine like Femina, Pioneer, The Hindustan Times. She has served as media coordinator for the BBC World Service Trust Project. She has taught mass communication and business English at Patna Women's College and JD Women's College, respectively. She has taught in the PG department of English at Gosnell College. Presently, she is teaching in mass communication video production department. Without further delay, let us start the much awaited session with Mihir Vatsa. I kindly request Ms. Sinha to start the conversation. One request from our side: before we start today's conversation, please keep your mobile phones switched off or keep them in silence. Thank you so much.
I want to ask you about your bio note that you have given in the book. It says, I knew you as a poet first, but you have poetry.
Okay, so yes, the bio says that Mihir Vatsa is a river walker from Hazaribagh fashion, and then there is the poetry and other things. So the bio note was written after writing the book. So when I was supposed to when the publisher said that, okay, we need a brief, something about you to be put in the front of the book, then I started writing. But then there are multiple authorial figures who write multiple types of things. So painting, for example, this book, my first poetry collection. So here the author is a poet, and therefore it makes sense. When I was thinking that how should I conceive of this author figure, Mihir, the author of this book, then poet and a writer, while it was an easy way to go about it, that Mihir Vatsa is a poet and a writer, but somehow it felt that this book is so particular that it couldn't have been written simply by a poet and a writer. Because there are multiple poets and writers, right? And they write many kinds of stuff. I am also a poet and a writer. But this is not a book written by simply a poet and a writer. This is a very particular kind of book. So then I started thinking that who is the author of this book? What is the interiority of that person? How is this Mihir different from the Mihir who is speaking here? And then I realized that the Mihir in the book walks with rivers. And that's what he has done throughout the book. And then that term just clicked, that he is a river walker. And then that's how it happened.
Was it also the fact that you seem to be a fan of a land shepherd who does hill walking, so did that click that?
Yes, it could have been. There is Land Shepherd, Robert McFarlane, there are multiple influences with regard to nature writing. And this book is not anthropocentric in that sense, where it does not concern with people. Like one of the observations that is made about the book is कि यहाँ पर where are your small town की गलियाँ and where are your जलेबी और कचौड़ी. I wasn't interested in जलेबी and कचौड़ी and small town की तंग गलियाँ, right? So that's the thing. I wasn't interested also in that supposed innocence of people who live in small towns, because I don't think that that's true. I think that's ideological. What I was more interested was in understanding the landscape, and therefore to write about landscape in an empathetic way. And perhaps a poet and a writer, that phrase was too anthropocentric.
Okay, that's why you chose
River
Walker. Okay. I think this question you must have been asked 150 times, but I'm going to ask it again. When did you begin to think actually writing this book? Or is it like you have mentioned in the book, the trip to your therapist, put the train on the track?
So the engagement goes much way back before the writing of this book. So engagement with Hazaribagh in its multiple forms. So I'm a student of spaces in literature. So I study spatiality. And one place can exist as multiple different spaces. So for me, presently I am the invited author. So I do hold some kind of authority in this room. But on another occasion, perhaps I would be sitting there and I would just be a spectator. So that space would be different. This space is very different. So I used to dwell in these multiple spaces of Hazaribagh. So first was historical, cultural. So that tradition started 2009 onwards. It was actually when I left for Delhi, when I left Hazaribagh to pursue my higher studies, then Hazaribagh became interesting. In literature, we have this concept of defamiliarization, right? So that Delhi had defamiliarized Hazaribagh for me, and then Hazaribagh emerged as a text which was waiting to be read. And so I started exploring from 2009 onwards. I dabbled a bit in archaeology, I dabbled a bit in cultural heritage, but the heart wanted to be with rivers. And so when that visit to the therapist happened, and when he said that go back to Hazaribagh, go back to your hometown, and वहाँ पर तुमको जो करना होगा कर लेना. And that had put me at the very genesis of Hazaribagh, that why Hazaribagh came out to be, which was as a sanatorium. So I was that person who needed that sanatorium. And Hazaribagh became a sanatorium in the colonial period because of its geography. And so I needed that geography. And that's how it came about.
In fact, that brings me to the next question, which is your intimate exploration that you have written about. It's an intimate exploration of Chota Nagpur Plateau. So, I mean, like this intimacy between you and the terrain runs throughout, you know. Can you tell us something about it? Because we see that occurring, you know, right in the front page. I mean, like in the first chapter itself, we see your love affair. We can read.
Yes, so that's a very, you are the second person actually, second academic to have pointed this out, that the book is a love story. So the genre is that of a romance. It's of course it's masked under this entire travel and memoir and all of these fancy terms, but at the core of it, it's a love story of one person and this piece of land. And therefore, on the cover, there is just one person. He doesn't care about other people. You know that other people don't matter. It's very much like you fall in love. When you fall in love, that's love at first sight. You are infatuated. And movies में ऐसा होता है कि one person looks at the other and the world goes blur, right? So the world doesn't matter. So in this book, for Mihir here, it was just him and the land. He wanted to get rid of all other distractions, you know, and this is problematic actually because land cannot exist without its history. And he dabbles in history, and yet he is very measured about it. He doesn't go far with history. And he was like, हाँ ठीक है, ये हुआ था, ये हुआ था, ये हुआ था, अब चलो वापस आते हैं अपने love story. So that's the kind of tension with which he operates. There's willingness to be extremely, fiercely affectionate towards.
Yeah, actually, I noted those lines down. Like you began with you want to do something for the town, and then in the next line you say it can do things to you, and then it was doing things to you. I mean, it's such a, it is a love affair.
Yes, yes. Even in that forest chapter, when I'm talking about that Salpurni waterfall, yeah, so that is also, it has heavy tropes of romance. Yes.
I suppose, I mean, as you said, a lot of research must have gone into it, even if it is, you know, like it's controlled. Could you tell us something about the research that went into it?
Yes, that was actually the most fun part.
It was?
Yes, so two kinds of research went into it. First is the archival research. So you go to libraries, you meet people, you access documents. And the second is empirical research, where you yourself you do experiential research. So two kinds of research have made in this book. There are multiple new things, especially in context to the history of Hazaribagh and its places, that I didn't know and people still don't know. So for example, this fact that the existence of the lake is tied to the existence of the central jail. And it was because that jail had to be constructed so that craters were dug out to supply raw material for construction. And those craters were then modified into the form of tanks. Tanks are still man-made. It has that connotation of being made by man. And then later the word lake replaced tanks. And now this man-made thing, it stands so gloriously for what we call natural beauty. It's fascinating, you know, how landscape changes and how it has the capacity to just alter your perception of things. Like even in here in Ranchi, people go to Ketu Dam, Rukka Dam, and they say, ऐसे मैं तो देखता हूँ Instagram पर photos आते हैं. So So they take photos and they're blessed by nature. And they think this is hardly natural. This is a barrier built by man to collect water. But there is some, what I say, cultural pedagogy, the cultural way of being educated about certain things. So we tend to believe that if a sun is setting down over a still body of water, then it's a natural sight, right? So that link, the lake chapter was a fascinating chapter to write. There was, ये आया नहीं है किताब में अच्छे से. I stopped there, but there's a mention of this house called Rattray House, and just a passing reference to how I met the great grandson of Captain Thomas Rattray in Scotland.
Yeah.
That's in itself a very fascinating story.
You have mentioned it in the book.
Just one paragraph, and that's the tension that I was telling you about. No, that if I went into history, then history is so seductive. Then
it would become something.
Then it would become like
tales of
yes.
historical tales.
Yes.
Hmm.
So that research was one, the archival, which happened across different libraries, British Library, Bule Imam Sahab Library, Library of Google, and the other is experiential research, which is done by walking. It is done by walking with rivers to understand the characteristics of rivers, especially plateau rivers. And I think here you see a model through which you can understand pretty much all rivers of Chukanagpur plateau, that how they behave. कब वहाँ पर बाढ़ आएगी, कहाँ पर waterfall बनेगा. There's a logic of waterfalls that because we are on the plateau has to fall somewhere. So that escarpment is where you go looking for waterfalls, and there you will find it. Yes, so ये सारी चीजें happen through empirical research.
Generally, I mean, the kind of books that we see emanating from Jharkhand are all about, poverty or exploitation of the land, of the forest, rivers, and even tribals. But you seem to have, skimmed over it. Was that a conscious decision?
Yes, and I can be held against criticism for this. That there was one person who wanted to. Who said on Twitter only, I read his comment, I hope it is written from a tribal's perspective. I didn't understand what that meant. मैं कैसे लिख सकता हूँ? I am not a tribal person. I simply cannot write from a tribal perspective. There was another criticism, जैसे मैंने बताया, इसमें लोग नहीं है. वो it says Tales of Hazaribagh, but it's not Hazaribagh town. And therefore the subtitle says it's an intimate exploration of Plateau. So Hazaribagh Plateau is the subject, it's not the town. So Jhanda Chowk के बारे में नहीं. So yes, there is skimming over certain parts, but then I can hold other writers to the same charge that you have skimmed over natural history of Jharkhand. So it's a two-way street. If someone is leveling a charge against me that you are not looking at poverty, or you are not looking at mining, and I am actually, it's heavily invested in mining. What I am doing is that I am not idealizing the landscape. There is a concerted effort on my part that landscape should be presented in both its good and bad. So if due to mining, one waterfall has been bastardized, as it happens in chapter 4, then it is my responsibility not to gloss over it. So there I am very truthful to my subject matter. And I was very certain that I didn't have to write a travelogue. First, यहाँ पर मैं यहाँ से गया हो गया खत्म. So I was wary of that Gumakari tradition, that superficial visiting. This is a book of dwelling. It's written over a period of 5 years, 5 to 10 years actually, and you must have noticed that it's repetitive. The same place has been visited over and over again in multiple seasons. Right? I don't think any book like this exists.
That is why I think that the first question that I wanted to ask was, do you categorize it as a travelogue? You said you didn't. So where do you put it? I mean, it shifts actually.
It is a shapeshifter of the book, very much like the hills, Canary and Zunjul. But because capitalism has created the need for genre, right? So it helps with putting books somewhere.
Yeah.
So So then, even if you turn the back, it says everything. It's
Yes.
travel, memoir, and non-fiction. And if you have some idea, we can put that also. So that's the
A love
charm.
story. I would
Romance.
Yes, it's a romance. with
That's
a-
the charm of the book. It's genre defining. Sometimes it's because I let the content take charge. So that was the thing. Earlier with poetry, it's not the case. Poetry, you still have the demands of the form. कि यहाँ पर खत्म करना है, इतने दूरी तक की lines लिखने हैं. This should be the length. That is how it should be made to fall into a certain kind of rhythm. But here I didn't want to, because rivers, hills, and plateaux, they don't understand human forms.
Yeah, but you have mentioned that landscape is subject to economy,
Yes.
politics, and public policy.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
So you are considering those aspects also.
So landscape is subject. That's the key word here. Right? That's the operative word. And that subjection is something that we accord to landscape. In the first chapter itself, where I talk about my territorial feelings about the Bible and kind of take that derisive tone on Koderma and later on Bokaro, that these have naturally and I have various types. So, but I still acknowledge that these hills do not understand how borders are drawn between districts. It's the humans who do it. So, the landscape is always subjected by humans to do certain things, but the landscape is mute, it doesn't speak. So that agency is whatever we give to the landscape, that becomes a agency.
Right. But when I read this book, I mean, your literature background came out very, very sharply. You're reading landscape through literature. What do you have to say about that? I mean, are you reconciling the two? I mean, like, I had to remember all my geography lessons to understand this. And at times I felt you were showing off.
I do feel that, and hear me out, that why I feel so. There are two strands that I'm going to follow. First, we must be extremely aware of climate change and what kinds of narrative we should be writing against this context. The second is that India is so full of humans and we have our own fights and our own predicaments that sometimes we don't get time to think about nature. People are fighting for land rights, people are fighting for their daily survival, people are fighting for food, every basic issue. And it would be perhaps quite rich of them to expect कि आप नेचर के बारे में सोचो, जब आपको डेली सर्वाइवल के लिए आपको स्ट्रगल करनी पड़ रही है. Given that Jharkhand is one of the poorest states in India, with very low HDL. So these are issues that are there, but then sometime we have to take some stand for nature because Jharkhand is also a mining state. So at one part it's called Jharkhand, the land of forest. Then there is, in the heart of Jharkhand is Hazar Bagh ka Sheher, which is, so forest and garden are binary. Forest is extreme wilderness, garden is ordering of that wilderness, right? So it's poetically it's quite rich. कि आप extreme wilderness के बीच में there is the human order of garden. But what is happening around is that incessant mining. कि अभी हजारीबाग के साउथ में NTPC is operating a huge coal mines. The waterfall in chapter 4 that has been turned into a stone chip mining area. Now, इससे भी तो particular matter तो बढ़ रहा है ना. So that idea कि झारखंड की हवा बहुत शुद्ध है और झारखंड का वातावरण बहुत सही है, that's sanatorium. The state that is on stake. So first is that. That we have to be cognizant of what kind of narrative we are writing against the threat of climate change. And the second is that I am also skeptic of, in fifth chapter it comes out very acidic, in an acidic way, of these petty terms called Sundarikaran or that commodification of nature, especially done through the mechanism through the network of tourism, so to say. Jharkhand is Jharkhand because it is still a dwelling space. It is not a consuming space. So the difference is that here you still have avenues to go to any uncharted forest, so-called uncharted forest. You can enter a forest, follow the trail, and go and sit somewhere and just dwell, just live, poetically live in that space. Because there are very few tourist spots. So you make your own space. And this freedom, this creative freedom, is very rare in present day where all natural sites are being converted to tourist sites. Kundlu Falls में zip lining होती है. So what percentage of man is there in Hundru Fall and what percentage of nature is there in Hundru Fall? That is the question we should be asking. So if you are thinking along these lines, then of course people perhaps and their issues will take a backseat and nature will be the protagonist.
No, my question was, I mean, like you are putting forward a literary perspective also. And
yes.
At some places I can
yes.
see that,
yes.
Our literature students reading it.
So then literature has to reconcile with landscape. Literature and geography have to come together, especially because of these two reasons. First, planting and second, mindless consumption. And all other knowledge teams are doing this. So engineering is doing its bit, biology is doing its bit. Our scientific researchers are contributing their bit. What is literature doing? So literature should step up, and perhaps this is how it can.
Yeah, and you've done research. But have you decided finally, and what does Hazaribagh mean? 1,000 gardens or 1,000 tigers?
अभी तो existential crisis है दोनों पर. Tigers तो खत्म हो गए, but garden पर crisis है.
Gardens हैं हजार?
It wasn't meant to be literally 1,000 gardens. More proverbial 1,000 gardens. But that's why the book is intervening at this crucial stage, where the idea of Hazaribagh as a garden is at stake. So either we can go with what the district administration tells us, Utri Nagpur Pramandal ke Mukhyalaya Hazaribagh शहर में आपका स्वागत है. So and once we accept that, then that's the death knell. उसके बाद तो फिर हमने accept कर लिया. So it has to be थोड़ा सा resistance होना चाहिए. I'm also skeptical of nostalgia. So if we say कि हजारीबाग बहुत अच्छा हुआ करता था, तुम अगर देखते 70 के दशक में, ठीक, then you are condemning me to not reach that beauty. Then you are also washing your hands off responsibility कि वो past में था, तो वो हो गया. अब हमें progress करना है, ये करना है, आजादी में करनी है. I am asking that why progress at the cost of nature? Is that the only way to go about it? So why can't gardens and the garden and the urban, why can't they exist separately? So we should come up with something like that. They should be in oppositional, positions to each other.
Okay, you mentioned in the beginning also that there are lack of human characters in this book, So apart from those, if you want to talk about them, you're welcome. But apart from those, even your features, natural features, they take on a character of their own. Which is your favorite character?
So that was the purpose of it. To create or to represent those things which are first mute, they can't speak for themselves. And I'm not saying that my representation is totally unproblematic. And I'm very cognizant of that. Any representation has its problems. But it has to start somewhere. And perhaps later someone can lambast me and say, "Here, doctor that you did," and I'll be fine with it. What the book is trying to do is start a discourse. And a very new kind of discourse that hasn't happened before. I was talking to you, sir, and we were talking about कैसे लोग आए हैं झारखंड में और फिर चले गए हैं live कर, ठीक? But what do people who have lived in Jharkhand for a long time, what do they think of it? I am not an outsider to Jharkhand, right? So I'm not attempting to understand landscape through the tourist gaze. कि मैं मनाली गया और वहाँ पर मैंने इस कैफे में खाना खाया, Instagram पर फोटो डाली. I'm very invested in whatever is happening. वो पुल कहाँ बन रहा है, कहाँ नहीं बन रहा है, everything I notice. So the places do come out as characters because there is investment. I don't think that if it wasn't for investment, then the reason they exist as nuanced and rich, it can only come from repeated visits, repetition, investment. Just like you go and meet your friend. You meet your friend every day or perhaps repeatedly, if not every day. Your friend is not one time friend. You have there or बोला कि हाँ ये मेरा friend है, उसको भूल गया.
Seasonal friends.
Seasonal.
Not friends. Okay, so you visited it in every season and discovered new aspects of it. But you didn't answer that question, which is your favorite character?
My favorite character is the Sarbarni waterfall because that was my first love. So there's always that foundation of first love.
How many have you discovered?
12, 13.
12, 13 new ones?
There is
I
nothing
mean,
new.
nothing new. I mean, like,
People
which
have
was not known to the...
not known to the town dwellers. Yes. So there are some I have told where they are, and some I have kept.
Okay, regarding your human characters, I mean, obviously your mother, is an integral part of it. So I'll go a little beyond what is, it's written there. I read your essay on English in that painting, that circle, red circle, white, where you mentioned that because both of them have come from a Sanskrit background, so they couldn't understand your, what you were doing with English language and literature. So after winning the Sahitya Academy Yuva Puraskar, have they understood finally? No?
So they know कि कुछ बड़ी चीज हुई है. But my father has read it. He understands some English, so he has read it. He attempted to write a message to me in English. It was a very sweet message. And my mother doesn't understand English that much, but she knows, and she doesn't need to understand because she has seen me. So she knows कि किसके बारे में किताब. And whatever I have learned as a dweller, as a walker, I have learned from her. So she has been that formative influence in my life, who take me from to places, even in Hazaribagh, like if not tourist places outside, but just we would hire a car and go to some river or some place and just relax there and watch the salt trees and hills.
I'll go a little beyond the book and go to that book. Yes, to that book, book of poetry that you have there, that painting, that red circle, white. You have a section totally devoted to her. You've become her voice. Huh? So, I mean, like, I remember reading that poem on Konar. And when I read that, those words, painting that red circle white, my mind was saying, okay, cultural connotations. And my heart was, like feeling the tension, the yearning of a child. So how, I mean, like, again, you told me not to ask who was the inspiration, but was your mate in the, spur to your creative writing?
Yes. So it's not that I hate humans. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not a misanthrope. I don't hate humans. The people are in the book too, and the people who appear in the book, they are also people who have been created as characters through investment. That's the thing. So there is no superfluous character or character who doesn't contribute to the narrative. Because इंसान के लिए इंसान नहीं है. So that's the thing. And so I take inspiration from everyone, and my mate first and foremost. Because she stood as an example of an independent working woman. She came to Hazaribagh, and Hazaribagh was literally a jungle from Patna, an urban center of Bihar, capital of Bihar. to this little known place Hazaribagh, जहाँ CR अपना आवाज निकालते थे. The school where she taught was a jail, and the place where we used to live, उसके पीछे जंगल था. So it was wilderness. And whenever my nani would come, so my nani would tell my mom कि कहाँ आ गई हो, ये मैथिली में है, पटना मैथिली में, कि कहाँ आ गई हो ये जंगल में बियावान में. So even for men, it would be a difficult task to leave the comfort of urban civilization and come to a place which is so wide in 1985. But then I saw that my mom did it, and she lived here in Hazaribagh for now 35 years, and she owned this place completely. और 10 साल के बाद ही फिर उनका पटना से मुंह बंद हो गया. देखिए वहाँ इतना हल्ला होता है कौन जाए.
People who come to Hazaribagh don't go back again.
So फिर हम लोग यहीं रह गए. And then so I was born here. So and I didn't live. So our place, wherever we have lived in Hazaribagh, it was never in town. So there was that detachment from the town culture also. So we lived by the lake. जहाँ पर my mother had her teachers colony वाला quarter. So we lived by the lake and it was detached from the town. Town में वो riots हो रहे हैं, लोग मार रहे हैं एक दूसरे को. We didn't care. My mom's school would still be open because इधर कुछ होता ही नहीं था. So while growing up, these things were never in my mind that the town can be a volatile place during the religious festivals. For me, what mattered was what I was seeing in front of me, which was the lake. So these have all come together to create this inspiring body.
Actually, I came to know a new thing about that school because it was a jail first, you said.
That's true for Europeans, not for Indians. So it was a racial. So that's why it's interesting. That entire lake chapter. So first you have to create jail. During the Coal Rebellion, 1831 से लेकर, which culminated in Santhal. So you arrest tribal people on various charges. You don't have any place to accommodate them. You have only guest house and dark bungalows. You can't put convicts in dark bungalows. So you undertake this entire enterprise of constructing jails. 1834 Hazaribagh becomes a district. So then that jail has to be expanded. Then 1860s, this new idea is floated in the British Parliament that the European convicts or criminals should not be made subject to the harsh weather conditions of the dusty Indian plains, and therefore they should be kept somewhere more, somewhere more congenial. So for all presidencies, so for Madras presidency, Uti became that place where such penitentiary was created. In Bengal presidency, Hazaribagh was the place where European penitentiary was erected. And that European penitentiary, then it was abolished, then it turned into a boys' reformatory school. So when Indira Gandhi Balika Vidyalaya was established, it was converted from a reformatory into a girls' residential. Like just the symbolism of little girls living in jail. Hey, that tells a lot. Hey, and yet all of this ties to the natural beauty of the Hazaribagh. So nothing is innocent. Landscape doesn't become landscape because it's just there. Right? We invest meanings, and if you know this history, then perhaps you will start looking at it in a different manner.
Yes, actually, you have mentioned that landscape has its own cultural and other history and other aspects.
And like you mentioned, that it's subject to public policy, history, and so many things.
So many things. Okay, but the emotion that you expressed in your, the poems are very different from what is expressed here regarding your mother also and your entire attitude. What do you have to say? Did the therapy, this exploration therapy work, or what changed?
I think so. First, I didn't know that I would undertake an exercise in prose. I used to think of myself as a poet, and I could have just gone on to write Tales of Hazaribagh in form of a poem. But then who would read it? I mean, let's be very candid. अभी प्रोज नहीं पढ़ रहे लोग, पोएम क्या ही पढ़ेंगे. So then I was very practical in that manner. I knew that if I had to write something on Hazaribagh, it had to be prose. So I was waiting for that time. Perhaps that exploration helped me break into a new mode of writing. I still think that hopefully the book is poetic. So
yeah, actually you've been quite humble in your book when you said that poets are very prosaic lovers. I think you said about in context of waterfalls.
yes,
Huh?
there is Milton hidden somewhere in that line. That talent lodges itself useless. It's sonnet from Milton on his blindness.
Okay.
There are little Easter eggs. Like when you were saying about literature and landscape,
Yeah.
and these are Easter eggs are hidden everywhere.
Okay. So we have to read it again to find those nuggets. And you also, I mean, in the chapter on lakes, I think you were wishing that one day you will also come with the love of your life or something like that.
There are multiple wishes. There's one wish कि मैं भी कन्हैया पहाड़ के पास जाकर एक फार्म हाउस में रहूँगा. Then there is also that I will also find love by the lake. So there are multiple wishes, and then there are multiple realities also.
That was a personal question. I mean, you can answer or not answer that. One last question. You added, like a tarka of humor in it. Every time I think of you impersonating a deer and going, ooh, I mean, it makes me laugh every time. I mean, so was that like deliberate addition or it really happened?
It happened. So, and the best way to tackle this question is to go back to the question of love. So when you first fall in love or are infatuated, then you try to explore. So you explore the character. So when I started walking in Hazaribagh Wildlife Sanctuary or forest, and then I started dwelling in that. So I was very eager to figure out the character of all those little streams and everything that was running, crisscrossing the forest. So one day, me, my friend Raza Kazmi, he is a wildlife historian, and my other friend Rahul, who works at Valmiki Tiger Reserve. So the three of us got onto Rahul's Bolero, and we took permission from the forest department to put camera traps. Camera traps हो जाएंगे, and दिन में नहीं देखते हैं, हो सकते हैं रात में देखें जानवर. So there was that feeble hope, right? कि how can we say कि जानवर नहीं है? So we wanted to see otters in the water. And maybe some cheetah or somewhere, जो भी दिख जाए. So we were testing that camera trap, and in order to test, someone had to play that part. कि अच्छा जाओ तुम हिरन बन जाओ यहाँ से यहाँ तक क्रॉस करो तो कैमरा will focus on you and take your photos, and then you'll see that if it's working fine or not. So then I demonstrated to be the heron, and then it was actually 10:30 बजे रात था, and it was biting cold in the forest. And we were in this random stream, and I just went, "Ooh, देखो मैं हिरन हूँ यहाँ पर, मुझे देखो मेरा फोटो खींचो."
Here a hiran doing
So that was very impromptu. So that's what Raza and Rahul also were like, "ये कौन हिरन हूँ करता है भाई?"
And there is also a ghost story.
Yes.
I mean, was that also deliberate? Or
That was because I wanted to. I didn't want to keep lakes just for humans. So I wanted lakes to be democratically available space for humans, ghosts, everything. Denizens.
Well done. Okay, I think we've run out of time. We would like you to read a small portion from your book, and my request, personal request, that you read one poem from it.
So I'll read a very short section from this chapter called Forest. When winter retreats from the plateau, the forest changes its color. Once the days grow longer, the sun gathers its heat and pours it little by little over the sal trees. The green leaves age, become loose at the branches, and by February they turn yellow and fall to the ground. This fall endures for hours, like a chain reaction, and in the forest, leaves are shed in an uninterrupted sequence. The slightest touch of a wind can initiate the fall. On the many forest roads, trails, and walkways, the spectacle of leaves falling lazily from the trees creates an immaculate dreamscape. There are many forests in and around the plateau. Except for the small patch at Canary Hill, the rest exist along the escarpment. The plateau itself is a smudged circle, the forest surrounding the town in a protective fence. The trees tame hot air from the plains and send to us colder winds. They trap and release moisture in the air, giving us the rains. When rain batters the tabletop, water tumbles down from the highlands, rushing from all sides to the lower plateau below. Each drop is a packet of energy. They combine together to erode the ground. The water cleaves the land into valleys and gulches. So urgent is its motion that hardly anything is retained by the town. Monsoon after monsoon, the gullies are renewed, reinforced into riverine paths. 5 major rivers originate from the plateau as thin streams. These rivers are Sivani, Konar, Barakar, Bokaro, and Muhane. They are infants in the town which battles water shortage in summer. When the monsoon recedes, the rivers grow malnourished with the passing months, disappearing ultimately into the ground under the summer's heat. When the water disappears, it leaves irregular dark traces on the sand. And one word. With a funnier one. It's called My Mother Visits a Beauty Parlor. In the rickshaw, she tells me she must look good today. Not that a friend or a relative was coming to meet us. She says, I have some money to waste. Now, it's not every day she makes extra cash. So I want to go to a restaurant instead. But we go to the parlor, where I sit outside the glass door counting scooters on the road. In front of me hang clothes for women. Saris with shiny things lining the borders, mannequins sporting cotton salwar suits. The next shop has a row only for sanitary napkins. I remember the many TV commercials with smiling women speaking about freedom and other liberating nouns. An hour later, she emerges from the parlor with shorter hair and sharper eyebrows. How does your mom look now? I grunt at her new hairstyle with an uncertain look, not knowing that she would not speak to me for the next 2 days.
Thank you, Mihir, for that interesting poem. I hope, as you mentioned in the epilogue, your, the sanatorium worked, and you have said, you have summed up very nicely in your epilogue that what I was and what I
Yes, I would actually like to read that part if we have some time, 1 minute.
Up to 1 minute.
Yeah. Because it makes for a nice closure.
Yes, closure.
So this is from the epilogue. We have spoken so much about exploration and everything, and this comes as a caveat to people who do this. The pleasure of exploration brings with it the arrogance of discovery. To detach pleasure from arrogance was a challenge. While there were many places throughout my excursions, particularly waterfalls, that I found on my own, it is also true that all these places had an apparent, if not documented, history of visitation. Even in the extreme depths of forests or escarpments, trails were always present. There were many people who had been to these places before. In India, one finds villages and people in the most unexpected places. So my explorations were hardly solitary. Nisan Lagwa's Axeman, Kurlungua's Shuktarudao, and the boy tiger at Ittikocha waterfall are reminders that stories are written by those who can write them, which is to say by those who have had the kind of education that makes writing possible. This aspect is important in India, more so in Jharkhand, which remains one of the poorest states in the country. Earlier, I would say, look, I have found these many waterfalls. But gradually, the sentence changed to look, I have gathered these many waterfalls. This change in verb helped replace the arrogance with fondness. A crucial event I went through in Hazaribagh was to realize that while depression was a presence in my life, it could not be an end in itself. In Delhi, it seemed like it was the only real thing. Moving past it felt impossible, which is why I had to leave the city. In Hazaribagh, I understood that there are ways to live with and beyond it. It was this illness which had driven me further into the plateau, into the forest and along the rivers. There are many places in the book I wouldn't have gone to if I weren't pushed by something that was larger than myself. And then it says depression, people say, is a matter of the mind. I recall here the title of my friend Manjari Indorkar's memoir, It's All in Your Head. And following this rhetoric, depression cannot be greater than oneself, but in reality it becomes. And when it does, it extends way beyond the person who suffers from it. I left Delhi not because I hated the city, but because at that time I hated myself in it. I came to Hazaribagh because I thought I could love myself in it. But how does one grow self-love out of self-hatred? It is precisely here that the plateau intervened. I loved it first. I loved its unrelenting flatness, and I loved its swift rivers, its ruins and its forest. I loved its lakes and its reservoirs, and though the heat annoyed me, I loved its summers too. When this love spilled over, it became easier to give some of it to myself. I loved myself through the plateau. If in Delhi the depression felt larger than me, in Hazaribagh the plateau was greater than me. Against this greatness, the mind had to behave. So I also changed, and this is another kind of distance. Between what I was and what I am, between hatred and love and cynicism and hope, is the plateau. It contains me and my mind.
I think now the audience can ask their questions.
I think I am trained enough in that to make historical claims. That's the reason.
But
I can talk about.
You quoted from Halton and
Yes.
Bradley Bird.
What I can do is that I can talk creatively about these sites as a creative writer. That's something I can do. But as a historian, that is something I can't do because I'm not a historian by training. So that's what, and if something comes up, if certain archives come up, then of course it will go on to enrich the work that I will do. But just as in the first chapter of this book, it says that it's not a history book, even though there is history in it. So I will not write a history book. I will perhaps write another exploratory book with history in it.
Depression. And I'm going to ask you about that. How did you decide to talk about your depression? Were you not worried that it might get you some, untoward attention? Stigma, taboo, yes.
So perhaps disappear myself while writing about the plateau. There is one observation which my professor made, who taught me at Ramjas, that there is a very curious quality in the book that even though it's the first person narrative, it's always like the author just recedes and recedes and recedes, and the place just takes on and on and on. So depression can be extremely narcissistic. If you start dwelling on your own parishani and your own, your own sadness and everything, and it could lead you to very extreme ends. But in order to emerge from that depression, you also need to emerge from that element of narcissism. And that perhaps can happen by relinquishing yourself towards something greater. So while it was larger in my mind, the plateau was in fact literally territorially greater than me. So it was against this greatness that I really had to create this.
The aspect of the printing of books, publishing of books. If you don't like to answer, you can skip it. The publisher have they interfered in the final version of the book which you wrote? I mean, have they edited part of it or not, and things like that?
I was actually a wonderful editor, Kartikeya Jain, and we bonded so well over the editing of the manuscript. One thing that he pushed me towards was to translate intuitive knowledge into words. So he would tell me, Mihir, because you have lived in Hazaribagh for such a long time, there are certain things that come to you intuitively. And you can't take this for granted that other people will also know it. Right? So when you were talking about it was a show off, right? So that's why it became important. Ki wo samjhana, ki how escarpments work, how plateau works. Right? So that I think I benefited very much from that feedback. But other than that, they let me pretty much do my own thing. The first proposal that I had sent to Speaking Tiger was a proposal of 15 chapters. And this had and pretty much into that commentary tradition कि मैं ये वाला जगह गया उसके बारे में लिखा फिर दूसरे जगह फिर it would have been your run of the mill travelogue. But once I started writing the first chapter and it had already overshot the 3,000 word mark which I had in mind, and I didn't feel that it was going to end at even 4,000, 5,000. So then I restructured the proposal and I told my editor कि देखो ये 15 पेज वो चैप्टर का नहीं होने वाला. I'm going to make it a very immersive read, and I'm not going to talk about 15 places. I'll focus on 4 or 5 places, but I'll make them rich. Because once you read about those 4 or 5 places, you don't have to go anywhere else to read about them. So that's the kind of restructuring happened, and he was very happy to accommodate that.
Settlers.
Hazaribagh is a town of settlers.
Settlers.
Settlers, yes.
Your family itself is a settler there. How did these settlers destroy the original beauty, scenic beauty of Hazaribagh? Did you visualize it?
How settlers have destroyed the scenic beauty, I haven't used the word settlers, but plenty of settlers have also invested that place with certain cultural meanings. For example, Bengali settlers. They have been so fond of Hazaribagh. And similarly, the plateau landscape in general of Chotanagpur. Much of romantic writing on Chotanagpur has come from them. Similarly, people who have come from Bihar and settled there, much like my mother, there is always this kind of tendency. One can settle in order to exploit, or one can settle in order to admire. So people like us, I believe that we are not exploiting, we are admiring. We might be, and it may not be aware, we might not be aware of that. And then there are people who go on to exploit. So the people who work in mining companies, they also go on to live in Jharkhand for generations after generations. Now that charge can be leveled against them also. कि आप झारखंड में आके रह रहे हो लेकिन you are pretty much mining out the entire landscape. But that's a different charge. That's an industrial charge. It does not have to do with the personal. So my best friend, his father works at NTPC. Now I can't say that you are wrong because he is doing his job, and that job, pretty much like my mother, the jobs have brought them both here. So I'm just a bit skeptic of using these blanket terms like settlers. There are multiple kinds of settlers, multiple kinds of settling. So that's what I would say. But this is at stake. That's why this book is important. If we say कि हुआ करता था, अगर बोल दें कि हुआ करता था, तो फिर हमने हाथ धो लिए. फिर that's an invitation, a tacit invitation कि आप आओ और आपको जो करना है करो.
It's a conscious project thing.
Yes, अगर हुआ करता है अभी भी अगर रखेंगे, तो फिर कुछ बात बन सकती है. Then there's still space for assistance.
Process is irreversible, no? You can't go back.
There's a very small question here. What next? What is an offering from here?
The next is my dissertation, which is a thesis.
Wait, just one time.
No, so it was designed by my publisher. Three options, and we all liked this cover really a lot because first, according to them, the commercial logic was it's so vibrant.
Yes, it's very cleansing.
So वो समझ में आ वो दूर से ही दिखने लगेगा. So like okay fine ठीक है दूसरे pop out कलर करेंगे. But I really like that how this is the layer down, this picturization of the layer down, Hazaribagh cycle, and that's the railway and road bridges, and this is me sitting on the alto. So I like this cover because it showed that this is a kind of story between a man and the land.
Coal India Limited. So I could very well correlate, with whatever you said.
My husband works for Coal India, so.
So I think listening to you has made me, like going to read your book and the climate change part also, because I work as an environmentalist in Coal India Limited. So it's striking a balance, between the two. So I think it's going to be an interesting read. Thank you for that.
For kind of placing Jharkhand on the national imaginary. And I just was thinking that have you thought about Saranda, where on the one hand there is the rugged green, and on the other hand there, you have the ripped bowels of the earth. So have you thought about it, and maybe you would write something about it?
That's good. But I'm not looking at pat idealizations of the plateau. According to me, it's a triad. It operates through a triad. The tribals are made to be a part of nature along the nature and cultural division. The non-Adivasis are culture. So as long as the tribals are nature, you can do whatever you want to do with them. So that gives the freedom to other people to do whatever. The second is, so first is cultural primitivism of the Adivasi traditions. The second is the so-called scenic beauty of the plateau itself. And the third is the economic prosperity done by mining and all the other industries. I was reading Vivek Bhushan Bandyopadhyay's short essay, travelogue on Ghatshila ke aspas mein, and he talks about Rakha mines. And abhi we associate mines with something ugly. But in that travelogue, he so naturally is saying कि Rakha mines की सुंदरता का भी बयान कर देते हैं. And what are you talking about? Since when mines became beautiful? So that perception has also changed. There's historicity to it. So in my abhi tak limited argument, I think that it operates through these three poles. First is the idealization of nature, the second scenery, and third this economic extractive policy. And idealization sometimes masks that extraction. This is a problem, that ideology of nature, when it is used to mask extraction, then we are being brainwashed. So when people say कि हजारीबाग की climate अभी भी बहुत अच्छी है, that's ideology. नहीं है अच्छी, 40 degrees चला जाता है. कहने को तो हम लोग कह सकते हैं. So it points at the larger malaise that we don't want to look at what we are doing to our environment. Abhi bhi if we go and check the particulate matter in Ranchi, there are so many stone crushers जो ring road के around है. I'm pretty sure that it's not the pristine environment. But if जाएंगे then we'll get a shock of our lives. Right? But that myth we continue to believe. So this is something that I want to explore further in my research. And I think Jacinta does an excellent job at this. She has such a good eye to probe both these things. कि सन भी गिर रहा है पानी में और वो पानी लाल भी है और वही लाल की जो पानी उसके पीछे लोग पागल हो पड़े हैं. Very interestingly, Nether Magnolia Point, Aditya Birla Group is preaching to us कि पेड़ लगाओ. Okay, while just 5 kilometers away they operate Gozari mines. So these kind of funny ironies just keep popping up, and I would love, and I am actually taking this up in my research.
For all of us to enjoy our cherishing conversation between Mr. Mihir, Vatsa and Ms. Meena Sinha, and know more about his life and literary interests. Now, I would now like to request Mr. P.K. Jha sir to felicitate Mr. Mihir Vatsa. I would now like to request Mrs. Puram Anand to felicitate Ms. Lena Sinha.
I would like to call Seema, my colleague, accompany me to felicitate Minali. हम सब साथ हैं.
Now I would like to call Mrs. Poonam Anand on the dais to thank everyone present.
Conversation between Mr. Mihir Vatsa and Meenaji and know more about his life and literary interest. On behalf of Prabha Khaitan Foundation, I, Poonam Anand, Ehsaas Women of Ranchi, would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Vatsa and conversationalist Ms. Sinha. I take this opportunity to express my gratitude to our patron, Shri Cement Limited, and our venue and hospitality partner, Chanakya Vienna. And even gets more interesting when there is a receptive audience. Thank you all for attending the event and making it successful and enjoyable. A big round of clap for the amazing audience of Ranchi. Goodbye to you all. Take care and stay safe. Before you leave, kindly get a complimentary copy of Mr. Mihir Vatsa's book, autographed by him. Thank you very much.